Skywalker and Han Solo rescued the princess, destroyed the Death Star, but their story didn't end there.
I don't know that any of you have noticed, but I can be something of a contrarian. And so I didn't really want to do anything about the new Star Wars, because every other motherfucker was. But the more time that passes, the more I mull over The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens, the more I mull over the new Star Wars, the more I realise that I do have things to say about it, if only to get them off my own chest. So, long after everyone has stopped talking about it, here's my take. I didn't like The Force Awakens very much at all, and I like it less and less with each reviewing that I do, because I kind of, like with the prequel trilogy, I kind of keep going back, questioning myself, trying to figure out why I don't like them so much. Because I was always a fairly big Star Wars fan, not in a buy everything sort of way, but the films at least, and the role-playing game, setting adventures within that world, that milieu, that I was always a huge fan of. And the original films are very self-contained. Each one kind of can stand alone as its own film and forms part of a trilogy. The prequels just are lacking something. I think Lucas, too much money, too indulged, didn't really have anyone to stand up to him and tell him what he was doing was not so good. All those sorts of things. He wasn't the young, hungry, enthusiastic storyteller and filmmaker that he was in the making of the original trilogy. And now he's out on his ear, so he's no longer really relevant. But that seems to be what went wrong with the prequels. He kind of just lost his way and had too much money and too much respect, and until the films came out anyway. But he's not super relevant to the new trilogy because, like I say, he's out on his ear. So what is going wrong with it? Why didn't I like The Force Awakens? And the problem with Rey is fairly obvious, but we'll come back to that in a bit. Basically, she has no arc, no story, but we'll come back to that. Many of the other characters just kind of seem superfluous, and the whole film is a retread of nostalgia elements. Here's some TIE fighters, here's the Millennium Falcon, here's Han and Chewie. It's like a theme ride through the original trilogy, without any of the heart, any of the soul. It's nostalgia plus the soullessness of the prequel trilogy, and it just didn't really work. And like I say, I've tried watching it again and again, and each time I come away liking it less and less.
Now, the creators of the biggest smash hit of all time bring you the next episode in the Star Wars saga, The Empire Strikes Back.
Now, The Last Jedi was a lot better. It still had some of the nostalgia theme park problems of the first one, but they were less obvious other than the rehash of Hoth and that whole, ooh, it's salt moment rather than it being snow. So it had some of those issues. Overall, it was a better film. The only one out of the new ones that I've actively liked and been enthusiastic about has been Rogue One, and even that had its issues. But The Last Jedi, while being a definite improvement, just takes a big shit over the original trilogy. Nothing they did matters, everything is reset, everyone's dying off with nothing really accomplished, nothing meaningful done. This war has gone on and on and on. The Empire didn't go away, it turned into the First Order. The Emperor may have been defeated, but who the fuck is this Snoke guy? And that's not really in the films. You have to go looking on Wikipedia or wherever else to try and find out who a lot of these people are, what they're doing, what their background is. It's not in the films like it is in the original trilogy. You don't know who any of these people are, and it's a retread and a rehash. And none of the characters are particularly likeable, especially in The Last Jedi, and furthermore they seem to have kind of ruined characters that we loved. And that's a big problem, and one of them is particularly glaring. Luke. We got to talk about Luke. By the end of Return of the Jedi, Luke is mature and capable. He is a fully fledged Jedi Knight. Somehow, between Jedi and The Force Awakens, Luke is reduced to nothing. Now, we know, looking back, now that we know what happened, why that happened, but it doesn't particularly fit with Luke. It kind of does and it kind of doesn't. We know that throughout the original trilogy there are moments when he is impetuous, overconfident, and these aspects of his personality greatly worry Yoda and Ben at various points. But he goes through this arc where he matures and becomes something more. So to see him revert to this impetuous, oh, I give up attitude, when that's what he's supposed to have grown out of, is really jarring, especially since we're not really shown why that happened. We're told why it happened, and we're not told why it happened until, towards the end of the second movie. Now, I think it's possible to fix that, to have presented it in a better way that people would have been more willing to accept. If the first film had started out finding out what happened to Luke and his students, that would have shown us rather than told us, and it would have set up the background and the understanding for this whole new trilogy. If, like, the first scene in the first film of this new trilogy had been, after an opening crawl, Luke did this, Luke did that, Leia did this, Han did that, without actually saying, just filling in the gaps, and then briefly explaining what the new situation is. And then we had gone into Luke's Jedi school, and we'd spent a bit of time watching him instructing the students, and we'd seen this strong, confident, capable Jedi Master Luke. And we had gone through and seen him, seen the dark side hinted at in Ben Solo and so on. And we had seen that happen and him turn on him, not necessarily with the full reveal, but enough of it. And then all of it burning, everyone dead, and him turning away and leaving. That would have shown us, and it would have set that up, and it would have worked much better. I think people would have been far more forgiving of the recharacterization and the backsliding of Luke than they were. And I think the whole set of films would have been much better received if it had been done like that, because that would have set the context and the mood and the feeling for this whole new trilogy. But then there's the characterization of him as well as this grumpy bastard. That they're trying to retread the Yoda thing, including some of the humor and so on, but it just doesn't work. It's that unnecessary nostalgia mill. Lucas always said that the Star Wars films rhymed, but a rhyme isn't the same word. You can't rhyme the same word twice. It doesn't really work. You need to make it change slightly. So if it had been a retread of some of the similar ideas but done in a different way, with a depressed and hopeless Luke rather than a grumpy, jokey Luke, I think that would have worked better. But then there's more problems than just Luke, and a lot of them center around Rey.
Continuing story of our band of heroes: Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Han Solo, C-3PO, R2-D2, and Chewbacca. And introducing Lando Calrissian.
Rey She's not exactly a Mary Sue. A Mary Sue is a self-insert, but it often has power and so on going with it. I don't know what the right term is for Rey. She's not even a blank slate protagonist like you get in, say, first-person shooter games, where people are meant to project themselves onto it. She's a hyper-capable, too strong, too good character. She has no arc. She has nothing to learn, nothing it seems to discover, unless that's a bait and switch. She's just nothing. She serves no real story purpose. She's got no arc. There's just nothing there. She's a cipher. She may as well not be in the film. The other characters in the film are having more of an arc, though I don't necessarily think it's a good arc. I mean, Poe is clearly meant to be the Han Solo of this one, but where Han Solo matures and becomes more responsible and buys into things through his own choices, it feels like Poe is being beaten down constantly, punished for being who he is, rather than maturing and becoming the best version of himself. But Rey, there's just nothing. You know, she immediately picks up on the Force. She picks up a blaster and is immediately good with it. She can fly a ship. There's no real learning curve there. There's no need for her to seek out Luke, other than to try and bring him into the fight. There's no need for her to go to him to learn. And Dick Yoda destroys all the archives and so on anyway. It's just her going and searching for Luke was largely pointless, really, in the overall arc of the story. And Luke's involvement was largely pointless in the overall arc of the story. You could take out all of that, and it wouldn't make that much difference to the film, really. So, what is the point of her? She doesn't need to learn anything. She doesn't need to develop. She hasn't developed as a character, and for her to be the central supposed hero, it just doesn't work. And the Stormtrooper guy, whose name I've forgotten, which just shows how much of an impact he makes on the screen, he's actually more like Luke and has a bit more of an arc to him. You know, from leaving the First Order and turning into this rebellion hero. That's more of an arc. That's more interesting. That's more like the hero's journey for him. But Rey, to hang everything off her as the central protagonist, just doesn't work. And it's nothing to do with her having tits or whatever. It's just there's no point to her. Even Anakin was a better character with flaws and development, even though it was a fall.
It's an epic of romance.
The whole ramming the fleet thing has a huge number of problems. For one thing, that tactic renders all conventional space battles obsolete. It renders the Death Star obsolete. It's just... it shouldn't have been done. But if we're going to do something like that, that should have been Carrie Fisher's send-off. They should have gone back and CGI'd or whatever and put her into those scenes and given her that self-sacrificing send-off. That should have been where she went out. That would be an appropriate ending for Leia. As it stands, we've been robbed of that, and I don't know whether she already pre-shot a bunch of scenes for the next film, or whether we're going to have CGI Leia or what. But it really felt like she should have been the one to self-sacrifice and give hope for the rebellion in the future. And that's with ignoring all the other flaws with that whole stupid plan and keeping things secret and everything else that was going on. I mean, they could have done it at sublight speed. Yeah, you could have had a drawn-out thing where it's bearing down on the main ship being blasted away and the shields are going down, chunks being blown off the ship, and then it just rams in. You could have done that without the lightspeed thing and done it more dramatically. But that feels like it should have been Carrie Fisher's send-off. And they could have done it. They could have gone back and redone it, but they didn't. Instead, it's the end of this character who nobody really seems to have liked, Vice Admiral Gender Studies. And it makes all of that kind of pointless and steals any emotion out of the scene. I mean, they couldn't have anticipated that Carrie was going to die. But once it happened, I think that should have been her Viking funeral, and it wasn't.
Of heroes and villains.
All of this is tinkering around the edges and talking about how I would have done things differently, and I'm sure any Star Wars fan has headcanon now how they would have done things differently, because a lot of people have issues with this new thing, just like lots of people have issues with the new Star Trek, whether it be the films or whether it be Discovery. But that doesn't really get to the root of the problem. So if we go back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, young George Lucas was really enthusiastic about cinema. The influences on Star Wars were westerns, samurai films, and those early Saturday morning serials. And that enthusiasm and love for cinema really came through. And as a result, he ended up with a classic mythic story. Princesses and knights and mystical evil and mystical good, grand dangerous forces, oppression, rebellion, all of these things, and it really tapped into people's psyche, and that's why it had such a big influence on whole generations of people, and why they put so much stock in it, and why they love it so much, and why it means so much to them, and why people are training in lightsaber combat and treating the Force as though it's a real philosophy, and the Jedi and so on with gravitas, even though it's fictional. It really grabbed hold of people and meant something, and that's not that surprising given it hits all those mythic beats of legendary tales, of religious tales. The things that tap in particularly to the Western human psyche, because it reflects all of those mythic tales that we grew up with, even before Star Wars. Arthurian legend, the taking up of the sword, the mantle, all of these things, wizards and magic and strangeness and the whole hero's journey thing, if you really want to get into that. That's what's missing, both from the prequels, though to a slightly lesser extent, that they weren't executed that well, and from these ones, this new trilogy, which doesn't seem to have any of that heart and soul or that enthusiasm or influence. It feels much more cynical, playing on the nostalgia and filmmaking by numbers, hitting the beats of the previous films rather than hitting the beats of the mythopoetic milieu that Star Wars used to fit into. And that's, I think, where it goes wrong. The new Star Wars is influenced by the old Star Wars, while the old Star Wars was influenced by stories and legends and old cinema, and brought them together into a new syncretic mix. The new Star Wars would be much better if it was drawing on other sources in the way that the original Star Wars was, instead of drawing on the original Star Wars, which it makes it 1, 2, 3 steps removed from the things that made Star Wars good originally. So it doesn't rhyme, it repeats, if that makes sense, and it doesn't have that same draw. It's not drawing on those same things that made the original trilogy so great, and the directors don't seem to have that young, hungry enthusiasm for cinema, for old cinema, for story that they used to, or that George Lucas used to. And I think that's where it goes wrong. It's torn the heart out of it. Now, some of this may be down to the way Disney does things, their operational parameters and so on, and not giving the directors enough freedom to really make their own thing. And maybe that's why Rogue One was better, because that was clearly drawing on old war films for inspiration, like Dirty Dozen and films like that. And that worked. Wasn't by any means perfect, but of the new films, that's the most successful as a film, and I think it's in large part because it is drawing on those other influences. It's a war movie in the Star Wars universe, drawing upon these old war movies for inspiration and using their stories to inspire its own, which is not what you see in The Force Awakens or The Last Jedi at all. Now, what's ironic here is that I think a director who has managed to retain this hunger and this enthusiasm for old cinema is Quentin Tarantino. It's obvious when you look at a lot of his films that he is really enthusiastic about different genres of cinema, from the kind of pulpy era of the detective and gangster films, which have influenced a lot of his work, to Grindhouse, to kung fu and martial arts movies, B movies, all of this stuff. He wears his influences on his sleeve, and even in his worst work, that enthusiasm and those references and that grounding in this enthusiasm for old cinema comes through. And he's directing a Star Trek film, not a Star Wars film. Bring Tarantino across, get him to do a Star Wars film. It will feel like Star Wars. It'll also feel like a Tarantino film, but it'll feel like Star Wars.
They cross trackless voids to unknown worlds.
I am really worried about the next film in this series, because so much has been wiped away, so much has been destroyed, that it's hard to see a way back at all for the series, just for that film. I mean, there is nothing left of the rebellion apart from a few hundred people. That's it. One thing they did really well was the whole spirit of the rebellion is still alive in the kids and so on. That was handled well. And there's these mysterious Outer Rim allies, but they didn't show up to help. So it's really hard to see how this can go anywhere, how it can claw back and come to any kind of resolution after all of this. That's a hell of a lot to pack in to a last film, unless there's like a big span of time where nothing is filled in between Last Jedi and whatever the next film is. Unless there's a lot of stuff that happens off camera that we don't see, it's hard to see how that will work. I mean, that's kind of what happens between Empire and Jedi to an extent, and that worked okay. But they weren't coming back from quite such a deep hole as this is. I mean, they got no fleet, no backup, nothing. So it's really, really almost impossible to see how the next film can drag it all back. Just too much story-wise, plot-wise, within the world. Too much has been destroyed in terms of fleet, in terms of power, in terms of support, and so on. It's just virtually impossible to see how this can be wrapped up in one more film.
A galactic odyssey against oppression.
Yeah, well, let's be self-indulgent. What would I have done differently? The first film, it's not the structure so much, or the set pieces so much. Bits of it were interesting, the scavenger lifestyle. I would have made Jakku different. I wouldn't have made it a desert world. I would have made it a literal junk planet. Like, everything would be covered in crap, and Rex would be being towed into orbit. It would have a ruin ring around it of wrecked Star Destroyers and rebel ships and whatever else. The whole monocultural planet thing is a big thing in Star Wars, but we've had desert planets, and we've had ice planets, and we've had forest planets, and we've had gas giants. I would have made this the junk planet. No desert, just trash everywhere. Junk pickers. Recalling places like that in India and other countries. So that would have been the theme for Jakku. Otherwise, the overall structure's okay. It's the characters that aren't, and it's the heavy trading on nostalgia that isn't. So Rey would be special, but she wouldn't have any idea. She would, why or how. She wouldn't pick up on the Force so quickly or easily. Just little tricks and things here and there, and flashes of visions. I would have made her actually have an arc. A learning arc in terms of power and personality and all the rest of it. I'd restructured it so that we saw the kind of fall of Luke at the start of the whole thing, because that sets the tone for all of these films. I feel like it's the most important event, because it gives us Ben Solo as Kylo Ren. Whatever happened to the Knights of Ren? We don't seem to have found that out at any point. And I don't think I would have had Snoke. He's just pointless. He's a rehash of the Emperor. Rather, why not follow what happened in the expanded universe and what has been incorporated into Rebels, and have Grand Admiral Thrawn and the rump of what's left of the Empire reconsolidating and fighting back and coming out of empty space, basically re-invading. Why not make that it? So, they were beaten back, but now they're resurgent with whatever's left of them. That would have worked much better. And having Ben as the Force user, the head of this new order, a bunch of evil, basically Sith Knights, that would have worked much better. Make Phasma one of his lieutenants instead of just a shiny, useless stormtrooper. But okay, so fair enough. The main thing that's really broken with the second film, besides the overdone nostalgia, is still Rey. She has no arc, she has no story, she has no background. In Empire, which is what this film should be rhyming with, we find out that Vader is Luke's father, and that's the big revelation. I mean, I understand why you wouldn't want to do exactly the same thing, but this revelation that Rey is nobody, her parents are meaningless, doesn't fit with the Star Wars mythos at all. If you want a good story where this is the point, read Unlundone by China Mayville, where the Chosen One isn't the Chosen One and someone else steps up to the plate and makes things happen. That is a way better version of this story. If that's what they're going for with Rey, and we may still see another revelation in the third film, to discover that's all lies or whatever. But if they're going for that with Rey, I don't think it works in the context of Star Wars, where bloodlines are important, where history is important, where people are special or chosen, or even midichlorian Jesus. That doesn't really fit so much with the overarching higher storyline of Star Wars. There are plenty of other chances for ordinary people to rise up and be important in the rebellion. There were plenty of ordinary people standing up and doing things in the rebellion, Wedge Antilles, all the rest of them. There's plenty of examples of that, but this big mover and shaker, this central point around the Force is bloodlines. It's the prince, the Messiah, all of those, the hero. That's what's important. So Rey should be somebody. And this could potentially also give us a way out of this whole there's nothing left, no Republic, no rebellion, nothing for the third film. What if Rey is someone special? What if she is the child of Obi-Wan and Duchess Satine? They had a dalliance. He was weak. there were rebellions and then the Empire crushing Mandalore. But what if she was secretly birthed, cryogenically frozen or whatever, taken away and hidden as far away as possible on Jakku, but she is the heir to both Obi-Wan's force powers and wisdom, because that's how things tend to work in Star Wars, and is the rightful heir to Mandalore, which is on the Outer Rim, which is where their supposed allies are. See, I would have worked in maybe Boba Fett, who survived the Sarlacc, has been tracking her, has been appearing in the background and whatever since she emerged from Jakku trying to find her, and we would naturally assume that he was hunting her down for some kind of bounty or something on behalf of the First Order or the rump of the Empire or whatever. But then we could have the reveal that when he finally finds her, and maybe there's other people in Mandalorian armor following along with him, instead of blasting or whatever, he kneels and offers her the Darksaber. And suddenly you have this resurgent Mandalore, an army of mercenaries and outcasts and bandits and, diaspora of Mandalorian tribes or whatever, coming in and forming the heart of a new rebellion as proper, genuine soldiers. And then you have this new ragtag fleet of scum and villainy turning against the new Empire, following their leader, Rey. She would be meaningful. She would be something. It would get you out of that story hole. It would restore that whole mythic, heroic aspect and the bloodline thing, and it would be a good callback to Obi-Wan. That does take it out of the movies. It means you have to know other stuff that's gone on in the Clone Wars cartoon and all the rest of it. But it would really dig the whole thing out of a hole. It would give Rey a meaningful existence, and it would return it to the way that story works. But everyone has their own headcanon. Mine is no better than anybody else's, and who the fuck knows what they're going to do. Zang.
A big, new, sprawling space adventure in the Star Wars saga. The Empire Strikes Back. Coming to your galaxy next summer.
Shine is on me like a dog on a what? Boom. Fight the power, put myself on the throne. You know when shit is getting heavy like it weighs a ton. I will run you down like a marathon. Take you up good, put you in the trunk. See you next Tuesday, you is a punk.